Hi, boys and girls. This is Ms. Kathy. I'm so happy you've joined me today for another story just for you. Garbage Can Boy by Dorothy Aitken. Please let me ride my bicycle to school today, Dad, Jerry begged as he shoveled a forkful of scrambled eggs into his mouth. It really isn't very icy, and the other boys all ride theirs. Sorry, Jerry. Dad shook his head emphatically. I know riding is more fun than walking, but the streets are too icy in the mornings and much too dangerous. Suppose you fell down in front of a car. I don't get it, Jerry pouted. Why can the other boys ride theirs? Well, for one thing, they are all bigger boys. You're only in the 2nd grade, you know. Yes, but I can ride just as good as Hans Peter can, even if he is a 5th grader. Dad was not to be moved, so Jerry finished his breakfast in silence and got ready to go to school. Jerry loved his church school. Even though there were only 2 children in his 2nd grade class, the teacher made school fun. All the students appreciated their school more because it had been in existence only a short time. Always before, keeping Sabbath had been a problem in public school, for Jerry grew up in Switzerland. Switzerland has one of the best educational systems in the world, but at that time it operated its public schools 6 days a week. That meant that all the children were required to attend classes on Sabbath. So when the leaders of the church decided to operate their own Seventh-day Adventist school, every child was jubilant. No longer would the Adventists in public school have to go to the municipal building on Monday morning and pay fines for skipping school on Sabbath. Even though Jerry had never had to worry about these things since he was only beginning his education, he had heard about the problems from the older students. There was only one thing that bothered Jerry, and he was thinking about it this morning as he finished his scrambled eggs and gulped down his Ovomaltine. The big boys from the junior high school took the same interurban train that Jerry had to ride to school when the weather got too bad to ride his bike. When these bigger boys had discovered that Jerry was attending the Advent school, they had decided he was a fair target for teasing. Jerry had never told his parents much about his troubles with the big boys. Mother had vaguely heard him say once that the reason he was late coming home for lunch was that the big boys wouldn't let him get on the train. But the lunch break always lasted 2 hours, and that gave him enough time to catch the next train, so Mother had advised him to wait until the older boys left the station. After Jerry headed to school on that cold morning, Mother busied herself with ironing, cleaning, and cooking. It wasn't until she put lunch on the table and Dad arrived home to eat that she realized that Jerry was unusually late. You didn't see Jerry along the way coming up from the station, she asked as Dad entered the house on the wings of a cold gust of winter air. Not a sign of him. I thought he'd be here by now. Well, he usually is. Even when he misses the first train, he gets in before 12. I wonder what could have happened to him. You don't suppose it's those big boys? She asked, half to herself. The next train should be in by now, Dad said, looking at his watch. I'll drive down to the station and pick him up. Mother watched uneasily from the balcony as Dad drove away. Surely those boys wouldn't really harm a smaller child. Dad drove to the station, arriving just in time to see the little blue train pull in. He got out and waited for Jerry to get off. But in a few seconds, the train moved on. No Jerry. Dad wrinkled his brow as he stepped into the car. The only thing to do was to go to the station at the school and find out what had happened. Dad parked the car at the station and went inside. Deserted. Not a soul in sight except for the old man in his green visored cap behind the wicker window. He looked up questioningly as Dad peered around the empty room. Could Jerry be hiding behind the building? Dad walked around the station. Nothing. No one. That whole end of the town was exceptionally quiet, for all the business people and students had long since gone home for their long lunch break. Dad stood thinking, wondering what he should do next. He was about to leave when he heard the garbage can rattle behind him. He turned, giving the can only a quick glance as he prepared to go back to the car, and then he heard something else. "Dad! Dad!" came a muffled cry from the garbage can. Dad couldn't believe his ears. "Dad! Here I am, Dad!" Dad strode to the garbage can and lifted the lid. There sat Jerry, scrunched down in the empty can, his head between his knees, shivering with cold. "What in the world are you doing here?" exclaimed Dad as he lifted Jerry out. "Those big boys," Jerry began, stretching himself. "They said Advent kids are just garbage, so they took me and stuffed me into this can. They said if I tried to get out, they would kill me." "Weren't you afraid, Jerry?" Dad said. "Oh, not really," Jerry answered with a bit of a swagger. "I knew that when I didn't come home, you'd come looking for me. And I prayed, too," he said, getting into the car. Dad drove homeward. "The lid was on that can awfully tight," Jerry said. "I tried to push up against it, but it wouldn't budge. But I knew you'd find me." Jerry smiled at his dad. And Dad had something to think about all the way home. How sweet is trust, and how comforting to know that our Heavenly Father also goes looking for us when we are in difficulty, and will bring us home with Him.
The story you have heard today is from God's Greatest Stories, written by various authors and compiled by Randy Fischel, and used with permission from the Pacific Press Publishing Association. If you're interested in any other books published by the Seventh-day Adventist Church, please visit AdventistBookCenter.com or call 1-800-765-6955.
This podcast is a production of the Carolina Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.